Okay, everyone, good morning. Happy Sunday, happy weekend, I hope. Welcome to session 2. And a little bit of rundown of what we're going to do today is we'll go through assignment 1, the article critique, and this will be a chance for a groupthink discussion. And the notes that you derive from this should help you solidify the paper you're going to write for assignment 1. And then, as you can see, we have a regular agenda, professional accountability, knowledge acquisition, and so forth. And then after that, I'll give you some whatever time remaining for group time, and I'll give you some tips on how to proceed to be effective with your group work. So with this, a little bit of administrative notes. At the beginning of any semester, there's naturally some drops and some adds. And so this is where the groups stand right now. We have one new member in the class that I've assigned to group 2, and we'll proceed with the group work. It's okay because not much has happened in the groups yet. So it's kind of okay that there's a little bit of adjusting here and there may be a little bit more by next week. Usually these things solid out by the second or third week of class. So we'll have some group time in the breakout rooms a little bit later to get you going on your group assignments, and I'll give you some briefing on what's going to happen next, what you can be preparing for in your group work. So at this time, let's do a group talk through on your critique of the using pencil and paper, and I just want to put out that yes, I was the lead author on this, and the project was my idea, and it was a joy to carry out. But my ego's not in this. For the parts where we're talking about the critique of all of this, if there's something you spotted that was less than optimal, and there's no such thing as a perfect study, you can say so. You're not here to flatter me. We're here to rip into this paper and see what worked and what you understand and what needed to be done different. And if this was done again, what would be better to solidify the science. So nothing going on personally here. Just another recommendation in developing your papers, you might want to think about taking a look at the bold underline portions and using that as your section headers. It'll not only keep the paper organized, but it'll make it clear for me to read to see that you've actually hit on every single outline point. So at this point, just unmute yourself and let's hear what you have to say one by one. No particular order, whoever would like to go. What was the purpose of this study? What was the phenomenon being studied here? Oh, just unmute and speak up, and we'll just manage the voice traffic as we go. Everyone will be courteous.
I raised my hand, I think. Sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't see that.
No trouble.
Thank you. I think the purpose was to look at both sort of the 3 methods of responding to the survey. So the pencil and paper, the internet, and the touch tone phone, and see sort of how it correlates to the sensitivity of the question asked. And if there's a method through which people were more comfortable disclosing the sort of more personal or more sensitive topics.
Sure, that's pretty much what the story and the purpose is. Anyone else have any other comments I'd like to throw in on this first one? I think that covered the ground very nicely. Thank you. Other thoughts? All right, let's then move along. And how about this one, number 2? What was the need or the rationale for this study? So for this one, you might want to kick off the sentence, the researchers wanted to determine or understand what? Okay, so a lot of that was pretty much answered in the first question. Maybe a thought here would be to understand if there's differences in how people respond to different forms of media of asking a question. How about this one? Which sampling technique was used and what was the sample size? So you could talk about the whole sample size or how many were in each of the three groups, either way. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it started right in the end of the lecture, right? Students would just sort of randomly take, I don't know what it was, a piece of paper, right, that indicated which of the three methods they would use. And they didn't know, right? And there was no one handing it to them. So there was no sort of potential bias of who they would walk to. And then it sort of narrowed down from there, right? There were these three groups of who would get each. And I don't remember the exact numbers, right? But I think maybe the internet had the fewest because there was a tech glitch. Is that right?
Right, yeah. So this would be a place where you could talk about the total number of people sampled and how many were in each of the three groups. And as for the sampling technique, you're right. So they would draw an envelope and all the envelopes looked alike, but there were three contents in the envelopes, as you pointed out. And technically, that form of sampling is called availability sampling. Meaning we just used whoever happened to be available on campus. Okay.
I think part of also the thing is that the sample frame was basically just undergraduate and graduate students who are taking the courses during a particular time frame in 1999. And there were only 6 courses that we were looking at with 1,077 students, which actually took 2,000 students were invited that were enrolled. 1,077, a little bit over half is actually who took the surveys themselves. So really, you only had 352 surveys, 33 response rate from it is what I'm seeing on the who actually took it and what the sample really was of this.
So that's a much more thorough response. That covers a lot more ground on how many people were offered to participate, how many people drew material, and then ultimately how many people participated. Very strong answer. Thank you. Let's move on. What was the role that the researcher assumed here? What did the researcher do? So you might want to take a look at how much contact the researcher had with each participant. Were they working one-on-one, or were they just given instruction to go off and do their own thing? So this is what we mean by the role of the researcher. So look into the paper and find some worthy answer for that. What kind of design was selected? So by design, we mean, was this a one-person pre-test, post-test? Was it a 2-group design, a 3-group design? What kind of design did you see here?
So basically, it was a 3-group design is what we're being told, though, with the online touch tone and with the pencil and paper.
Yeah.
They were assigned randomly to one of those 3 different methods.
Right. So this is a 3-group comparison design, right? And what data collection strategies were used, or were multiple strategies used? And I think the answer to that last question suggests the answer to this question.
I think there were 3, right? There were the 3 methods that were actually being sort of surveyed themselves.
Right. The instrumentation for each of the methods would be a good response to this 6th question, because unlike most studies that have one way of collecting the data, the whole point of this is, well, let's gather it 3 different ways and see what happens across these 3 different ways. So yeah, a little discussion about what the 3 different data collection methods were.
So would this have been quantitative?
Oh, it's definitely quantitative, right? right? Because the check boxes that they selected, yes, no, or declined to answer, were actually coded numerically as 1, 2, and 3. So that's how it actually gets analyzed. Check boxes are typically thought of as quantitative, right? Qualitative is where you have text and you have to analyze the text that's coming in, and at some point it may get converted to numbers. Okay, so number 7, what strategies did the researcher use to minimize potential bias? So one way to think about bias in terms of ethics would be, gee, if I wanted more people with higher GPAs to be routed into one group, I could maybe shuffle them around. Did any of that happen?
Oh, because it was completely random, right? It was somebody just picking up the envelope. It was their own choice, and there was nobody giving any instructions.
Right. I think you hit on the strongest word there is random assignment. There was no influence of who's going to land in what group and what that might do to that group. And as a rule, random assignment is a really great way to reduce potential bias, is you're not overloading one group with special people and other people are being deliberately routed to some other group to maybe underperform. So random assignment takes care of that very nicely. It also is kind of a magical method for taking people who are exceptionally high on some scores or exceptionally low on another score, and through random assignment, it just evenly seems to distribute people on all characteristics so that each group has a reasonably similar load. And curious that random assignment can do that. So I think there's your strongest answer there. Limitations of the study, and every study has some limitations that it either didn't answer something or didn't address something or left you curious about something. What were one or several of the limitations you saw in this study? One was mentioned earlier about technology. Want to bring that up again?
Yeah, I think I remember reading that on the 3rd day of the survey, the website that you would actually go to access the survey crashed for about 27 hours, and there wasn't really any way of knowing how many people would have responded in that time or if they went back, things like that.
Absolutely. That's a good spot. Yes. So with all that technology going on, we lost some people. So we don't really know what the end there, the sample size would have been there. And but we got a reasonable load of people to support the statistics. That's a good point. Thank you for noticing that. And what were any other limitations of the study? Or things that you think could have been done differently that would have strengthened the findings?
I think a limitation or a way to be able to avoid the limitation is it's a good sample size. So it's the 2000, but it's located with one particular school, which implies a particular culture, in this case, California type of thing. A larger sample size, whether to include, for example, a cross-section between California, let's say Midwest, and then compare also with maybe the culture for the Northeast on what would be the preference. In other words, for example, if you have a small rural community college in Iowa or Kentucky compared to a large school in California, would there be a difference in the technology more students are responding with to be able to do this type of self-reporting?
Excellent point. And this brings us to the notion of external validity, is can we take what we know from this well-assembled sample and say, okay, now we know how the larger population works? And the answer is kind of no. With all humility, the rejection rate of students that apply to UCLA is 86%. Only 14% of the people who apply get in. And these are who you're talking to, and this is who you're going to say, oh, now I know all about the larger population. Well, you sure just don't. So as you pointed out, maybe this should have included samples spanning multiple universities and geographies in different types of populations across the country, rural, urban, and so forth. And what if this study expanded beyond those very handful of very special people who wind up at university? What about the larger population? So there are the constraints, as you say, when it comes to generalizability, that being external validity, meaning can you take what you learned from this study and say that you now know something about the larger population from which it was drawn? And the answer is kind of no. We know about students at this university, and it stops there. But at least it provides the seeds for a new kind of thinking, and maybe this could be reproduced by someone else. But I think you've hit on the big limitations of this. Any other limitations that y'all noticed?
Perhaps the age group. Most likely in a college, there is a certain age group that's available.
Could you say that again? I missed the words fell down.
Right. So I was saying that perhaps the age group in a college, there's a certain age group that's available to the researchers.
Right. So maybe this age group is particularly technologically savvy, but what would happen if we had younger or considerably older? Would this happen with the senior population? Would they be as tech savvy? And would we start to see differences among the answers? Absolutely. And again, this goes to external validity. You know, this very select sample that we drew, and we have all these convincing findings. Does this really expand out to the larger population? And the answer is not really. It suggests, hey, take the same model and try again with a different sample. Sure, and then see what happens.
Which could imply also with economics and things like that too. For instance, a lower income group may not have some of the same technological savvy, just as certain age groups may not have that same savvy as well. Comparing people that are in a culture such as at UCLA with that higher rate of a rate of people not being accepted, the smaller rate, I'm assuming also have a better chance to have a greater access to technology in the home. They're going to have a greater familiarity how to be able to navigate those type of systems to be able to provide those responses, where somebody from a lower income, let's say from Burnside up in the Bronx, may not have as oftentimes access to some of the good quality internet, things like that, and so may have more difficulties with that familiarity how to be able to do that type of stuff.
Absolutely. And something else comes to mind right along the lines of what you're saying is we already know that younger male populations are the ones that are more likely and wealthier are more likely to have a computer that has internet access and knowledge of how to use that. So if that went to a household, the online survey went to a household that didn't have a computer that had internet and people experienced enough to use it, we would just lose that person. They wouldn't participate. That would be a no-go completely. Another thing is, well, there were plenty of post boxes in 1999. In fact, at UCLA, there was a row of 4 post boxes at one point, all side by side. I would drop my Netflix discs back in there. Remember discs? And now it's like post boxes are an endangered species. And I'd wonder if the same problem might happen for people who got the postal survey where it was a paper mail-in. Might they have some difficulties getting those back to us? Because the post office will deliver, but not everyone's postal carrier will pick up mail and walk it out to the post office. So yeah, there's more room for limitations there.
I'm also curious about the idea of confirmation bias. Joe, Jack, and Jill over there are probably going to all respond yes, appropriately for different questions showing they know the technology. Do I want to look like the odd man out? So I'm going to shape some of my responses to match some of their responses.
There is that possibility, but a lot of that is covered by the anonymity, where there can't be any trace or retaliation. And it was spelled out that this is anonymous, and a lot of effort was just the way it was implemented. It's intuitively anonymous. And typically people will alter or sanitize their responses per social desirability when they know they can be identified. But the research shows that when you make that anonymous, you can expect more genuine responses to come through but I definitely see what you're saying. And this is the difference between anonymous and confidential. It's a subtle protocol difference, but it can make all the difference in the world in terms of responses. How about ethical considerations? Anything there that's worth noting?
I'm not sure if it's ethical or if it's a limitation, but we have to sort of remember that this is only capturing one moment in time, right? We can only sort of say this is the way this happened in 1999 to 2003, and that it might be very different now, right? I would sort of hypothesize that, like, I don't think college students are comfortable using the actual voice part of a phone. Maybe there could be added like a text message response option. But I do think we have to remember that this is a little bit, just because technology advances, it's a little bit sort of stagnant in terms of the period it's reflecting.
Absolutely. And this is something that we need to consider. I wouldn't put it under ethics. I would put that back under Section 8, limitations. But that's a good point, is as studies age, particularly studies that involve technology, we could have very different social conditions and things that people are now accustomed to, or maybe people are skeptical over the phone. And yeah, it didn't occur to me that the sound of the voice may be something people are a little intimidated about, that maybe they'll match my voice, but they can't see my handwriting in text. That's an interesting point if this were to be redone. But getting back to, so those are all good points that go under question 8 about limitations. And studies that are aged out really should be reproduced. It'd be interesting to see how this would run again today, even with the same population. But how about ethical considerations? Did you find any ethical breaches or things that were done right that support good research ethics? Either way.
Well, there was no coercion going that as a quid pro quo type thing. If you take part in the survey, you have a better chance for a higher grade because of this type thing. Because of the fact that it was anonymous, I don't have to worry about, well, if I don't turn in my research, Dr. Knapp is not going to be very pleased and therefore affect my grade. That factor is lacking, which is a good thing.
Sure. And then I also want to point out, I wasn't teaching any of the classes. I contacted the instructors, said, can I have 2 minutes of your time at the end of your class? And they said yes. So they could tell, again, whoever this guy is, he's not going to do anything about my grade. And they could see, again, they're not putting in their student ID, their name, and so forth. So, right. I mean, so that was non-coercive. And also, when people take the envelope, if they open it and they don't like what they're seeing, they could just toss it with no penalty, and they know they're not going to get in any kind of trouble over that. So, another ethical issue reasonably addressed. Any other thoughts regarding ethics on this, positive or negative? Okay, and let's look at the last one here. How was informed consent and confidentiality handled? Or was it? Well, instead of confidentiality, maybe you want to talk about anonymity, which is really the protocol that was used. And in terms of informed consent, there was a briefing, a verbal briefing at the beginning of each class, and also there was a briefing and debriefing sheet in each packet that basically said, this is what you're being asked to do if you wish. Okay. So any other thoughts or questions before we move past assignment 1? Okay, well, I hope this group talk was useful in solidifying your ideas, sharing your ideas, bringing ideas together. I hope this gives you what you need to write strong papers for this. And it doesn't need to be lengthy. I'm not impressed with long papers. I'm much more impressed with strongly written work that is to the point. Long papers are not, a lot of words aren't where the grades are. So put your ideas together, and I look forward to reading your work. And I hope you found the study interesting. I found it fun to do, but I hope it brought something to you. And the ultimate lesson that I discovered in all this is that the methodology, things came out about the same across the board. Meaning, if this generalizes out to the larger population, you can look at what's your sample size and what's your technology and survey budget, and then decide which of these methods are going to be a good fit for what you're doing. It wouldn't make sense to set up a touch tone survey if you're looking at surveying 20 or 30 people. It's much more complicated than that. You're better to just go on paper or maybe an internet thing. And by now, I'll also point out that this isn't in the paper, but the question was, well, might things be very different now? The answer is absolutely. I mean, I had to hire a programmer to create the online survey, but now there's no shortage of do-it-yourself online surveys that you can configure. You don't have to be a programmer. If you've used any of these online survey things, they're a breeze. They're kind of fun to set up, and you can launch it and run it yourself. Okay, so with that, let's move on. Let's talk about accountability in terms of social science research and what we do. There are multiple entities that we are accountable to: clients, public, professionals, the profession itself, and funding sources. And research helps to assist with accountability, as opposed to us saying everything's going fine. A competent professional would say, can you show me some evidence that shows just how fine you're doing? And this is where we get into the research realm. So accountability further, we have the CSWE, the Council on Social Work Education, that accredits social work schools, and they will go through the grades and the syllabus of every BSW, MSW, MSSW program and assess, are you keeping on track with the prescribed curriculum that has been unified and approved for BSW and master students, and what are the grades doing, and what do the syllabi look like, and who is teaching this, and what are their qualifications? So there's accountability to the profession. We also have the NASW, which develops professional social work and social worker protocols and specifies conduct for research. And then there's the ASWB, and they assist with regulation of the social work profession also. So there's more than one entity that is interested in how are we doing what we're doing, and this is the research arm. Can you think of other organizations or institutions or individuals that monitor our work and assist with accountability?
Most schools, medical places, places doing research, institution review board.
Yes, and we'll be talking plenty about IRBs. Can you tell a couple words about what an IRB is and why they even exist?
IRBs, really what it's doing is that when you go ahead and submit a proposal for what your research topic is, they're going to be taking a look at it from an ethical perspective. Is this going to cause the least amount of potential harm, the minimum amount of harm, in order to be able to get a maximum result that's going to be beneficial to a larger community?
Very well put.
I explained to you what my proposal was for my thesis type of thing. I'd come up with that at a different school and had to go through the IRB to say that, okay, because I'm aiming it at a particular population, how I'm going to go ahead and do the research so as not to cause any harm, discomfort, that type of thing.
Exactly. So the IRB is there to review your research protocol, make sure everything is in line and credible, and their biggest concern is the protection of the human subject, that you can do your research, but not at the cost of harming people. So there's big accountability. Any other thoughts about accountability in our field?
I would also think that the APA is also an accountability source.
Sure. I mean, the behavioral sciences, absolutely. By the way, anyone have a supervisor? Okay, so there's chart audits and work. Yeah, how about that? And they have supervisors too, and they're doing chart audits and making sure that protocols are being met, forms are being filled, procedures are being followed, things are being prioritized. So yeah, there's multiple layers of accountability. When we talk about knowledge acquisition, this takes us into a slightly different realm. Variety of ways of knowing things. The science of knowing things is referred to as epistemology, that asks and answers the question, how do we know what we know? And we're going to take a look at a few forms: authority, tradition, experience, beliefs, intuition, and the scientific method. So let's start with authority. And this is an authority figure who can assert that something is true. Can you think of something that you know or that guides your practice in any form based on authority? Someone who's told you to do something, or someone who said this is how this goes. Can anyone think of any examples there?
A supervisor, for sure.
Okay, and supervisor has some protocols, some ideas on how you're to proceed with something, and they say, do it like this, and you say, absolutely. Okay.
The state monitors me.
Sure, there's state that they say this is how this is to be done, and your job is to say, okay, I'm going to do it that way.
Also, like,
go ahead.
Like Oasis, say you're a KSAC or something, you have to bring their methodology into your practice.
Okay, so more work protocols specified by authorities. Sure. How about tradition? And when I say that, I always think of Tevye, and it's like, here's how we do things because we've always done it that way. Can you think of anything that you've learned or that you do just because it's always been done that way, or you've been told this is just how this has always been done? Anything come to mind there?
I was going to say, I think sometimes in a workplace, this is a bad justification, right? Say it lacks creativity, but in sort of a different system, right? Like in a family or something, I think there's something nice about doing this. Like, oh, this is the way my grandparents did this.
Right. I like that you brought up the two different domains. I mean, in my household growing up, at Christmas break, we would bake bread and gingerbread cookies. And I always wondered why we couldn't do that other times of the year. That was just a tradition. There's no law written down anywhere, but that was just a family practice. But in professional domain, there were certain practices that it's just, this is the way we've already done it, always done it. And you'd scratch your head and think, I wonder if this was ever evidence-based or good science even to begin with. Just because it's been around forever doesn't necessarily make this right. And I was fortunate that once in a while, a new supervisor would come in, reassess everything, and push old practices aside, saying, this is, I don't know where this came from, but this is not the way to go on this. And it's refreshing. But sometimes traditions do work. How about experience? What do you know from experience? And please feel free to use professional and personal examples. What have you learned from your own life experiences doing things? Any wisdom you've accumulated along the way that informs how or when to do something?
I'm a very relational type of person. So when I go out to interview families and everything, there's a list of questions that the state has us ask for investigating allegations type of thing. But instead of asking the questions, I incorporate them into a conversation because I find people respond better to conversation rather than being put on trial right then and there to go ahead and respond, cross-examination, direct examination type of thing.
So you weave, your experiences taught you that an array of questions can put someone on the spot, but if you weave it into a conversation, it seems more natural. So you're taking the best of both worlds, matching to the protocol, but delivering it in the way that you've discovered works per your experience. It's a great example. Thank you. How about beliefs? This is a body of knowledge that's acquired mainly through reliance on tradition or authority or belief systems that have some pretty powerful influence on us. What do you? How do beliefs influence how you function, how you make decisions? Okay, so I was raised with the notion of be as honest as you can. You know, when in doubt, just be honest. And I believe that's a good way to go, and it's worked. You know, experience has shown me that's been something that is worth doing, and so we go from a belief to having some evidence to support that belief. But you don't always have the evidence. Sometimes a belief stands tall by itself. How about intuition? Let's not neglect how we can just sometimes have a gut feeling of let's do or not do or not say this. Anything you can think of that you just do kind of intuitively seems right.
Well, we interview families, and sometimes when we're asking questions, they're giving us the answers we want and everything. And it's like there's a part of us that's going, oh, this feels a little hinky type of thing. And let me go ahead and delve into this a little bit deeper to see if this really matches reality, different things like that. And so that's when we go ahead and check with our collaterals and that type of stuff.
Yeah, so you just got a gut feeling. There's something fishy there. I'm gonna follow that. So we don't have big evidence, but your intuition, probably through experience, guides, and it's not foolish. Very often, it's right on the mark. Now we also have the scientific method, which we're going to spend some time focusing on, and this is a systematic way of knowing we have observable or measurable facts and objectivity. And this is where we're getting closer to the scientific method. Not that there's anything wrong with the other methods. They inform our decision making, but scientific is a little bit more rigorous here. So how is the scientific method of knowing more objective than the other methods? Any thoughts on that?
It's
You could think
taking
of
away
the
some of the
object.
bias.
You could think of objectivity as if somebody else were to do it, they would get the same thing, whereas other people might have, say, different beliefs or different intuition. So please go ahead.
Kind of takes away the bias of an individual because we're all biased in a certain way. And so a scientific method is more straightforward and tries to take out some of that human error in some ways.
Sure. So as we move more toward quantitative methods, like counting how many times someone is late to work, we're not just saying, gee, this person's like always late. It's like, no, they were late 22% of the time this month. And if anybody else counted, they would get that same 22%, as opposed to saying, well, they're not really that late. It's a way of becoming more specific, more objectifying, and as you pointed out, reducing bias. So the phases of the scientific method are pretty intuitively clear. First, we observe something or we're measuring something. This is our initial observation, something that we're starting to notice. And then we develop a research question and corresponding hypotheses. So our research question asks, what do we want to know? And then maybe our research question is, does receiving affirming text messages affect self-esteem? It's a good question, and maybe we could set a computer up that'll kick out these messages automatically, just have nice things to say throughout the day. And then our hypotheses, which is a big fat word, and it's seldom completely understood, but you can think of the hypotheses ultimately as the answers to the research question. So our research question is, does receiving affirming text messages affirm or affect self-esteem? We have the null hypothesis because we want the answers to that research question, and sometimes the answer is no. The null hypothesis means that treatment has no effect. H sub 0, affirming text messages have no effect on self-esteem. Alternatively, we have the alternative hypothesis, which says affirming text messages have an effect on self-esteem. So we have the research question here and the corresponding hypotheses. The null hypothesis is saying it has a null effect. Affirming text messages have no effect on self-esteem. Alternatively, alternative hypothesis, affirming text messages do have an effect on self-esteem. So this is a pretty concise way of building your research question and the corresponding hypotheses. Any questions on that?
Please. You know what? I find that I'm still on belief and intuition. I'm thinking about it. The truth is that those things are so, there's so much bias and there's so much behind it that will be different from person to person. So you're kind of constantly.
This is true, but if you can just move past this particular research question and just see the logic that we build a question, whatever the research question is, and then we have our null hypothesis that's saying it wasn't effective. We have our alternate hypothesis, H sub 1, that says it is effective. And maybe we would have some instrument, some validated instrument to measure self-esteem and see how they do, as opposed to doing nothing at all. But I want to just verify that you understand how the research question relates to the corresponding hypotheses. So any questions about the structure of this? Okay, because this is something you'll be doing as part of your work. Next, we test the hypotheses. So this would be implementing some way of gathering data and then analyzing it statistically. And based on the statistical results, we could then resolve the hypothesis and decide, is it H sub O, that the text messages provide no further support, or is it H sub 1, that the text messages are effective? And we have different ways of gathering data. We can go quantitative, and the root of the word quantitative is quantity. And so this is seeking to explain or predict or test the existing hypothesis. And as we see here, we could gather a numerical response. For example, if we ask, how do you feel? The quantitative response might be something along on the Likert scale. 1 is very unhappy, 5 is very happy, and they will code a number. And we would refer to that as a quantitative value. Alternatively, we could ask an open-ended version of the question, which would provide a qualitative response. How do you feel? And then they would write a little story here about their feelings. And this provides deeper, richer understanding of not only how they feel, but maybe what brought on that feeling, which we wouldn't get if all we had was a number. And then we have mixed methods, which is just a concise way of saying we have quantitative and qualitative on the same instrument. And here is an example of a mixed instrument. A mixed method instrument. This is the actual instrument that I used when I was teaching HIV oral rapid testing to medical staff at the VA in Los Angeles. It's a simple device that you rub across the gums, you drop it in the developer solution, and in 20 minutes, it kind of looks like a pregnancy test stick. If it's 1 bar, that tells you no HIV. If there's 2 bars, that's telling you that you have a positive, the ELISA test, the enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, and then there's follow-up care that goes with it. And there were a lot of things that we needed to teach that went with that. And at the end, it administered this anonymous survey where this part here is quantitative. So the date numbers, all of the check boxes, all of the Likert scale, that's all quantitative. It gathered numbers. And then down here at 13, please include any feedback or recommendations that might help us improve this in service. That's qualitative text story. And when you put those two together, you have a mixed methods instrument. Now, the steps of the quantitative process is we begin with problem identification, and then we select the variables that we're going to use to monitor the person's progress as we do our implementation. We design the study, 1 group, 2 group, pre-test, post-test, whatever it's going to be. We then collect our data, analyze the data, interpret the findings, document it, and based on those findings, it may set off a way of refining and redoing the study to gather more or more specific information. Now, qualitatively, you see all these exchange arrows, and there's all this text coming in and meaning deriving, and this can mutually serve to inform each step of the research process. It's much more complex, and we're not going to be going down the qualitative road in this class, but it absolutely bears mentioning. I've had the pleasure and privilege of participating in several qualitative studies, and the findings of these studies were something you couldn't get by just asking checkbox questions. So talk a little about the difference between pure and applied research. And I've had, again, the privilege to participate in both. The goal of pure research is simply to develop theory and expand the profession's knowledge base, whereas so, for example, I worked with a doctor at the VA who was looking at how a nerve responds and how it is desensitized with more exposures. I didn't understand the exact relevancy of this, but he wanted to contribute to the body of knowledge of how nerves react. And I ran the statistics for him, and okay, maybe someone will reach for that someday. So that's pure research, whereas applied research is pretty much where we go as a profession, and many go professionally, is we're doing research to answer a very real identified problem. What is the best solution to this problem? So that's applied research. Well, again, pure research is motivated to the desire to increase understanding there. So we talked a little about that. Applied is we might be asking questions like, which is the best smoking cessation program? Which is the most effective? Or which program seems to be the best way to reduce high school dropouts? Can anyone think of any other applied research that could be conducted that would match to the scope of our practice, our field? Or a research question that you'd like to see solved that addresses a very real problem? So maybe it could be something like, which is the best substance abuse recovery program for teens, or this particular group of teens, or which is the what's the best intervention to reduce unwanted pregnancies? Whatever you can think the problem is, chances are a good research paradigm could be set up and conducted to answer the corresponding questions. Okay, among the research roles, we have consumers, creators, we have contributing partners. Our consumers are hopefully the public that would be interested in our findings, and professionals should regularly review current research in responsible, evidence-based practice, peer-reviewed journals. And this would take us to the answers to research questions that we have in the field. Just about any issue that you have that you'd like to see a solution to, chances are other people have coped with, asked, and answered the same question that you're struggling with, meaning you don't have to dream up the answer. You know, as kids, we're told, don't look at your neighbor's paper. In evidence-based practice, in summary, it's like, yeah, look at your neighbor's paper. Someone who's been at this a lot longer than you has done a thorough investigation. In fact, many researchers may have looked into this, and by peering into the papers that they've published that have asked and answered the question and systematically tested this, you may be able to adopt and maybe even adapt the solution that they've already come up with. So go ahead.
are there generally reviews that summarize within whatever given field the research and for a given year?
Sure. So what you're talking about, it sounds like, is a meta study where a researcher will gather, say, a year's worth of research, or maybe they'll span beyond the year, and they will publish a table with plenty of text discussion comparing these, say, 7 approaches to solving this problem. And they're used the 7 different papers. I'm just saying 7. To discuss and compare and contrast what seems to be the story, the solution here. Maybe these 3 found that when you do it this way, it really works. These 2 found an entirely different approach, and these found some other approach. So there are meta-analysis papers that do pretty much what you're asking. You can also, of course, look up the individual studies, and that's the glory of having access to a good literature database. Is you don't have to sit there scratching your head saying, well, maybe if we do this, it would get a good. Others have asked and answered that question. Access that, and you'll have, this is evidence-based practice, you'll have something that isn't hypothetical or hopeful. It's been shown to work. And if it's been shown to work in multiple domains, or there's several papers with people having similar results with similar methods, now you're really onto something. Does that make sense? Okay. And then, of course, the creators these are the social workers who specialize in conducting researchers. So in a nutshell, it's the MSWs who carry out the on-the-ground work directly with clients on a regular basis, whereas the PhDs, they specialize in carrying out research and advancing the science so that practitioners have something to reach for when they reach for research and they're looking for evidence-based practice. So the PhDs are skilled in research methodology, statistical, social science, program evaluation, and so forth. They're the ones who are pushing the boundaries of new findings and gives us something that we can reach for when we need to have a good idea of how to proceed with solving a problem. And then we have contributing partners. This could be research studies that are involved in collaboration with PhD students or other organizations. Sometimes research is carried out in-house, but more typically, there's a partnership with an evaluation or a testing organization that's staffed with skilled people who know how to carry out good research and in an unbiased way. So they're not as wrapped up in the day-to-day operations. They can have a little bit more objectivity and expertise in doing the research. In terms of credibility, that's critical for any profession. And the more we can demonstrate that what we're doing, our practices and the decisions that we're making are based on solid research, the better the credibility we have. We're not just fly-by-night doing things that we think could be helpful, which may or may not be. But we're showing that we lean toward evidence-based practice, things that have been shown and demonstrated to be clinically effective. This helps to solidify our credibility, our confidence in what we're doing, and also the community's confidence in what mental health and human service professionals provide. So how about within your field practice roles? Have you ever felt that the work that we do is seen as credible and well respected, or have you experienced something different from that?
I think it's just a lot of public perception that we're baby snatchers at my agency.
Yeah, that can be a perception that when you come in, families fall apart. And they may not be certain that we're working with anything scientific or solid. Maybe we're just bad, mean, biased people who have awful attitude and bad mission. Sure, that's a possibility. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer and I work and I teach at a law school, and I'm sort of the only person who thinks about any of these issues. And so it's a question of getting another profession to see something else as equally valid and equally credible, which is something of an uphill battle really at all times.
Sure. So it makes you feel more comfortable if somebody says, why are we doing things this way? Wouldn't it be something if you could say, well, according to so-and-so, this is the protocol that has been shown to be most beneficial, and you can quote the study, and maybe you get better engagement with if not only you can believe in what you're doing, that you're not flying by the seat of your pants, but you're following the guidelines of something that's been shown to be a good pathway through the problem. Maybe the problem is bereavement, and instead of just holding hands and feeling compassion, which is nice, maybe there is a methodology that's been shown that brings benefit and recovery to people. And if they shake their head and say, I don't know why you're asking me these things, well, now you can explain it and tell them they're on track. And you might even be able to quote something of the study. People who've been in this situation have shown this kind of recovery over this time frame. So this can actually be used to instill hope. Is like, I don't think you're exceptional. I think you're as others are in this situation, and this is why we're doing things. Of course, you can adapt. For instance, if it says you need to do this therapy, whatever it is, 5 times a week, and it's just not going to work for them, the question is, well, how many times a week do you think you can commit to this? So as anything in life, if you want to be successful, you've got to be flexible. But it's good to have something to be flexible on instead of just making stuff up. So it adds to your confidence, it adds to your credibility, it enhances the profession, and it enhances people's confidence in who we are and what we do. We also want to be aware of our own values and what we're bringing to the research realm. Value awareness. You need to know who you are, and you need to do what you can in research to set aside your values and opinions when doing research. And I'll give you a very real example of this. When I was at the VA, my first project was on, as I mentioned earlier, a team that was our goal was to enhance HIV diagnostic testing throughout the VA. And we worked at not only at the VA, we worked at homeless shelters and tried to we offered the test to anyone, but we had special services available to those who identified as veterans, and we would get them to care. And we did this in primary care. And about a year and a half in our Friday meeting, my supervisor said, okay, now we're going to implement this in ER. And just a little bit of hand-raised survey here. And you can keep your anonymity if you don't want to answer. Has anyone been to an ER as a patient or accompanied someone to an ER? I'll put my hand up twice. Yeah, okay. So you have a little bit of an image of what goes on. Now, in clinical setting, I worked for years in a hospital providing care in ER, ICU, CCU, oncology, Code Blue Team, all the fun spots. And basically what you see is they tend to the emergency only. So if you come in with a broken arm and a rash on your left foot, they'll treat the broken arm and refer you to a dermatologist for the left foot. And as soon as my boss said, we're going to do HIV oral rapid testing in ER, my first thought was, you've got to be kidding. That's going to so fail. And I kept my mouth shut, and I hope I didn't even bat an eye. And I said nothing, because if that were to spill out from an authority figure, that could have really had a negative impact on everybody who would have been working on that team, and the outcome of the project, it would have bled out everywhere. And I kept my mouth shut. My job was the training part. And I went into the ERs and at the appointed time, and I taught the nurses, and I did it with great enthusiasm, and I showed them everything, and I performed like a trooper, and I didn't let any of my bias slip in, knowing that that could poison the well and ruin this. And there was no one more surprised than me that this worked miraculously well. And about a year after that, with the door closed, I confided in my supervisor. I thought this was going to tank. And he said, I'm glad you handled yourself as the professional that I know you are. And then, we had those conversations, and I said, I wanted to see if this could have its chance. And this is an example of keeping our bias in check. You can still believe what you believe, but you don't want it to bleed into the science that we're doing and possibly start to change the outcome of a study. Let's, at this point, take a 5-minute break. I like us to have a break every hour. So with that, I'm going to put myself on mute. I'll put a clock on the screen. We'll come back. We'll do more in 5 minutes. Okay. See you in a bit. Okay, welcome back. Hope everyone had a nice little break there. Let's move things forward. Any thoughts on some ways that we can limit the introduction of bias into our studies? We talked about a couple of them with the discussion of the paper, and then I talked about a very applied method. Any thoughts on how we can stop our bias from leaking into our research?
Random is a really good way. The larger net that you cast, with it being entirely random for the responses, it doesn't necessarily remove the biases from the people participating. For example, if I say, well, have you quit abusing your wife? It's going to be very limited on responses. But if you go ahead and cast it in a way where you're not introducing your own bias into it, you might get a larger sample size to go ahead and respond, and be with an entirely different sample frame because of that, where it's like, instead of everyone within just one group, but we get a larger number of groups responding to what you're doing.
Right. So you've raised a lot of good points. So number one, if you're going to have a multi-group study, random assignment is going to stop you from biasing the group, is loading preferred people into this group and others into that group. Also, you mentioned larger sample sizes helps to reduce bias. And if you can take a more diverse sample, instead of, say, surveying only, say, engineering students, maybe let's get all different kinds of students, different majors. All good concepts, yes. Anything else we can do to, and also unbiased wording of questions. We don't want to tip our expectations of how we want a question answer, or ask a question in an accusatory form, as you put it, as a complex question. Any other thoughts on what we can do to reduce bias in our research?
We can have other researchers look over our work.
Absolutely, and they could check to see, are you gathering a viable sample? Are you distributing members in a random form? Do you have biased language, or are you carrying out your questions in a biased way? For instance, let me just give you a question two different ways. Have you ever used cocaine? Okay, another question, another way of saying it, have you ever used cocaine? And just the look on my face and the way I'm saying it is saying, you better say no to this guy. He's telling you no is the right answer. And I use the same words. So, we want to see, maybe this should be a survey question that they do online or on paper, because you're bringing something to the question. The way you're asking it is really biased. Even if you're not trying, it could leak out. Okay, good thoughts. Researchers I like to think of as just curious people. They just have a great imagination and a benevolent mind that says, well, if we did this, might that get better? And this is the thing that I think the benevolent curiosity kicks off the line of research. And I've been privileged to see this. Now, once we have something that looks like it works, wherever possible, one of the hallmarks of good science is replication, reproducibility. It's kind of like a baking recipe, that if you follow these steps with these ingredients, it'll produce that cookie. And it's the same thing in science, that if you reproduce this methodology with these kinds of people, it should produce the same kind of results that I saw here. Not unlike the survey that you read about, the three-way survey. And the big question came out is like, well, we should do this again and see if it still holds true, and maybe with different populations, and we're 20 years later. And that's all really good thinking. Does it stand up? Is this reproducible? And if it's not, now we have something new to talk about. What do we think is causing these differences? So the question here is, what are some reasons why it might be difficult to replicate a study on human subjects? What do you think could get in the way of seeing a consistency when this group does it and this other group does the same thing? What do you think could get in the way there?
I think human fallibility or human change, right? If we take the study from the article, right? Let's say we repeated it at UCLA right now. It's a different group of people. The times have changed. But let's say simultaneously we were doing it at UCLA and Yeshiva. They're across the country from each other. They have different populations. You're never going to get precisely the same result. You may be able to see trends based on age or gender or whatever it is, but they can't be identical just because of human nature.
Exactly. People are just a moving target. Now, we might find something similar where the statistics are showing, wow, we're seeing that there is, again, no statistically significant difference among these three methodologies on these questions. But will the numbers be identical? Absolutely not. Or we might find radically different findings on selected questions. Yeah, people are just such complex moving targets, and times change, people change, populations change. It's tricky business. But the good news there is we don't need exact findings. For instance, if we had a two-group study, a control group and a treatment group, and we wanted to see which one was better for enhancing mood, we might see in study one that the treatment group did this much better, and it was statistically significantly better than the ones in the control group that got no care. But if we did it somewhere else, we might find that this other group did this much better and this other group did that much worse. So the conclusion that there is a statistically significant effect in doing this treatment would still hold, but the numbers would be coming through differently. So yeah, lot of room for variability there, and it doesn't mean that people are doing things bad. It just means conditions are different in different places. And then we come to sharing. And part of the purpose of sharing is not just because our parents taught us, share your toys, is if I know something that looks like a solution to a problem, I don't want to just keep it to myself. In the same way, let's just go very concrete. If a pharmaceutical company comes up with a drug that solves a disease, they don't keep it to themselves. I mean, yes, they're financially motivated to spread that around, but share the solutions. And not only by sharing the solutions are we contributing to the base of evidence-based practice and propelling people's health forward, but as was mentioned just a moment ago, is replication. Maybe we need to see if this thing that worked so miraculously well here and got this result, does it do just as well? Do we get the same thing here? Is this really generalizable, or are we just on to kind of a one-shot wonder phenomenon? So this takes us to a different question, is how does sharing results of our research findings, our applied research findings, meaning implementations that actually bring benefit and solve a problem, how does that empower marginalized groups, minority groups? How might that help them?
The information, depending on the research, would become more commonplace. So it would just be some, it would give understanding to more people.
So a disenfranchised community that wasn't necessarily part of the original research could potentially benefit as we find this applied science brings this benefit. Well, let's deliver that to this marginalized group. I think you're absolutely on target there.
I think it helps also. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
I think it helps gives us a more of an objective type of thing to be able to say, okay, this is why we need such and such a type of policy or research put in place, is because members of our community, we feel like X, Y, Z, but it's always we feel like. But now if we're able to point out because such and such a study shows that children born into homes with 1, 2, 3 as a problem experience such side effects. Instead of saying it's a feeling, we have an objective, unbiased evidence argument to be able to make to show that this is what is happening, cause and effect. What can we do about it now?
Exactly. And as you point out, suppose that was piloted on this group over here, and now we could say, look, I've got a population that's experiencing that same problem, and have I got a solution for you? And when you implement it and document it and measure it and do the quantitative science on it, say, look, they got better too. this adds more credence to the evidence-based practice, and it could bring about further care in similar communities. Say, well, this marginalized population benefited from it, maybe we should adopt it too, and it could spread. So success breeds success. And instead of withholding, let's go big and see if we can help. And of course, there need to be adaptations. As with anything, you don't want to just be guided by cookbook evidence-based practice. You have to be flexible. If they're saying we can't do this on Sunday, you say, okay, what's the good day to do this? And you work with what you have. So, of course, evidence-based practice occurs when we use research findings to design and inform and guide our interactions in treating clients. This brings us to the citation. And for next week, and this is something I want you to consider for our group time. I'm going to give you group time breakout rooms for the remaining time of the class. I want the groups to focus on the code book, and I'll show you the code book, and it pertains to, it's basically the data definitions for the data that you'll be analyzing for your group projects in this course. And I want you to familiarize yourself with the variables, and your team will be selecting 2 pairs of variables to analyze for your group project. So let me show you specifically what I mean. First off, this is the data set in R. Don't panic. I just want you to see it, and we can scroll through this. And what we see up here is this is question 3, this is question 4, question 5, and so forth. And it's a little bit cryptic what that all means. And this is why we have the code book. Let me inflate the size of this a little bit here. Hang on, I'm going to do a little screen management. Okay, that's a little bit more viewable. So this is an inventory of all of the variables, all of the data that was collected on the student survey. And what we have here is, this is Q3, and over here it says Q3. And the question is, what Wurzweiler program are you currently enrolled in? And these are the choices. So as you scroll down here, you would see those entries. The next question is Q4. Are you a part-time? Are you a full-time or part-time student? So here's Q4, and in the database, there's Q4, and there's all the corresponding answers to it. Each row represents one person's responses. So for the assignments, what you're going to do as a group is select 2 pairs of variables. And then you're going to carry out your literature review on that, your statistical analyses, and so forth. So this is an important part of the process, is selecting those variables. So what I'd like for you to do is familiarize yourself with the list of variables that you have to select from. So suppose, and I'm just going to pull this as kind of an arbitrary thing. Suppose you say, you know, question 4 looks like it has some value, and I wonder if gender is a relevant, this isn't probably the best question, but I wonder if the relationship between full-time and part-time student, I wonder if that's gender specific. I wonder if it's males that opt for more part-time or more full-time and females opt for what, or maybe, is gender really relevant? Do they come in at about the same rate, the same percentage of males and females going full-time and part-time? And if that's your big question, that can be one pair of variables that you're looking for. And then your group will identify another pair of variables. So what I'd like for you to do is, this is the SAT code book. And then there's also, you'll find, so just so it won't be confusing, is there is this PDF version of it. And it's a much longer document. It's 34 pages long. The other one is, I think, about 11 pages. And it's the same information. It's just a different organization. Use whichever you want. I personally think this is just a better layout of the information. So read through this, go shopping through the variables, flag the ones that are of interest to you, and then come up with some pairs of variables that you think would make for an interesting research paper. And then you'll be having those conversations with your team in future meetings. Hopefully come to that determination soon on what pairs of variables you'd like to pursue for this package for these assignments. Does that make sense? Any questions on what I'm asking you to do here? Okay, and don't panic about not understanding R yet. We will get there, and ultimately I will be demonstrating the various different kinds of statistical calculations that you can do based on the variables that your team selects. So we'll be covering that later on, but don't worry about making heads or tails of R. You do need to make sure you have R operational so that you can do these calculations and the R homework. But for now, any questions on what you're being asked to do here?
Sorry, I may have missed it. Is the codebook itself on Canvas, and do we know where
It
on
is.
Canvas? Okay.
It is. Yeah, you'll find that. I think there's directories of downloadable documents, and I think it's in the R data folder. There's not that many folders. I mean, you should be able to find this in no time, and just pull down. I would recommend viewing the SAT code book as the Word document. You can also choose to see it as the PDF file, but I just think this is a little bit, it's just lengthier and maybe a little tougher to read, but whichever way you choose to go. The main thing is get yourself familiar with these variables and come up with brainstorm of some ideas of pairs of variables that you think could go together that would form a viable research question and the corresponding hypotheses. You don't have to build those now. I'm asking you to just know what's in here and start using your imagination to see what to kind of go side by side.
The
Questions
our homework
about that?
is the our homework is due February 13th, right? Those are all the due that's on Canvas. Those are all the due dates.
The first one. Right, the first
Okay.
one is due, which is a simple get R up and operating and run this simple code. And I'm not asking you to interpret the code or write about the results, just run it. And all that is, it's evidence to me that you have R up and operational and all the gears are moving in the right direction. That's all that assignment's about. Okay, and if the coding is confounding you, just send me a screenshot of R up and operating and show me in the, you might want to take more than one screenshot. I think Psych was that you've loaded up the packages and just check them off and show me screenshots that show that you have R operational and that you've loaded the indicated packages. And if you need to send more than one screenshot, you know how to copy and paste the screenshot into a document, and I'll be fine with that. If running the code is confounding you, don't panic about that. The purpose of that assignment is for me to see that you're R ready. Okay, so we'll do that for assignment 1 on the R homework. It's not to overwhelm you, it's just to see that you're operational. So any questions on what I'm asking you to do at this point to get your team lined up so that very shortly you'll be agreeing on which pairs of variables? Okay. Yes.
Is there an overview, a written overview of each assignment, or is it?
So all of the assignments are specified in the syllabus.
Okay, so just through the syllabus. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then, of course, if you download the 5R homework assignments, those are just simple documents that you'll find. All of that's on Canvas. If you have any trouble getting it, let me know. And at some point, what we talked about last time is in each of your groups, I strongly advise that you identify who is going to be the project lead, the coordinator that's going to be the person that brings things together and doesn't necessarily make all the delegations. You do this, you do this. Best is my recommendation is find out what parts of the project each person feels that their strength is that they want to do, and at some point assign each person their roles and what they'll be responsible for. And to that, I don't mean to micromanage, but having done this multiple times, my recommendation is that the project coordinator, the lead here, who will do their fair share of the work too, they're not just the manager, go through the outline for each assignment and get a commitment from each person of what portion they're going to write, and actually write their name in that section on the outline in the syllabus that, okay, I can depend on you. You are going to write this part. And this way you'll be able to see that every part of the outline is populated with one or maybe a pair of people. Maybe two people are going to collaborate on, say, the literature review. I'll do this part, you do that part. The two of them can work out what's going to happen there. So that's a good way of making sure that the spread of the work is fairly even and that everything is covered. Does that all make sense?
Where are these assignments? Where are the
Everything's
assignments?
all of the assignments are specified in the syllabus.
Okay.
Professor, I'm having trouble
Okay.
opening the syllabus.
Oh, you can't get the syllabus?
Yes, it says that it's in part of an unpublished module.
Oh, that's not fun. Okay,
You can find
I'll
this-
have a look at that.
You can find the syllabus under where it says library resources and e-reserves. And then if you go to the top of that, it says course outline, and that's the SWK.
Actually, let me go to the Canvas site. Hang on just a second. Let me go to the Canvas site for the course, and I can direct you. Okay, so 6402, here we are. So here's the literature. You could pull down all of the literature that's cited. These are my PowerPoints, which I'm redoing. Here's our data. So here's the SAT code book, and here's the PDF of that. And here's the syllabus. So I've done what I can to make the Canvas site kind of one-stop shopping. Are you able to reach all these? No.
I think can't see the syllabus. We see everything else.
Oh, you know what? My apologies. That wasn't published. I am so sorry. Let me see if I can restore this, and it's showing. Now it should show. If you restore your screen, it should show now.
Yep, now it's there. Thank you.
It is there. Okay, good.
It is there.
My
It's
apologies.
also, I think it was also on the general Wurzweiler website. I think that's how I accessed it.
Okay, well, this is the one to go for because it's got my contact information and so forth. So go there, pick it up. My apologies for not having that checked off, at least for early enough in the process that we caught that. The rest of these are published. You should be able to access everything. Okay, so questions before I put you in breakout rooms and you can have the last half hour, of course, to confer with your peers and work along those lines. Any questions before I do the breakout room?
I have one
Yeah.
question. I was reading throughout Canvas. You mentioned something about chapter 3 from the text, Orbach and Zitlin. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly.
Yes.
Where in the syllabus do you describe these books?
Oh, the books aren't listed in the syllabus?
No, sir. During this whole time, during this session that we were having, I have been searching for this information in the Canvas.
Okay, I will update the syllabus to include I will look over the syllabus. I thought it mentioned the textbook, so I'll make sure to get that to you.
Thank you.
I
know
think
the
I see
other
it
stuff
in
I
there.
found in files. A
What-
lot of
I
the
think it's
stuff is
under
in files.
it's under page 3. Then it says basic text, and it says the following 2 texts are required for this course.
Where did you see
Okay,
that
well,
at?
On page 3.
Page 3 of the
At the top
syllabus?
of the. Yeah.
She's able to get in there.
well, now that you can reach the syllabus, take a look at page 3 because I believe it's listed. But you shouldn't have any trouble getting the book. And I'm going to go through all of the statistics that we're going to cover in the book. So I'm never going to just leave you book alone and just do it. I'm going to demonstrate and explain everything. So nobody's going to get lost in the statistics here.
I have a problem and I'm not sure. I don't want to use people's time. If I can please talk to you about computer navigation.
Okay, well, we can do that in office time. Why don't you just email me and set an appointment, or we can have some time directly after class if you have time.
Okay, just because I want to be on for my friends and my classmates.
Okay, sure thing. So for now, let me go back in and
Professor, I have a question about the 2 variables that we're supposed to be choosing. What are they based on? How do we choose the variables?
I didn't hear the last part of your question.
My question is, how do we choose the 2 variables? Is it a random selection or?
No, it's not a random selection. So it's something like you're interested in the relationship between 2 variables. For instance, let's see. Okay. Okay, so how about this? You're interested in how important it is that the teacher is available for you after class hours. That's important to you, and you think that might be related to something like age. Maybe age is relevant there. Maybe people who are older, you think might want more contact with the instructor, or maybe you think younger might want more contact with the instructor. So it's kind of an intuitive relationship that you're curious. I wonder if that's a factor, or maybe you think age is related with living with family members. Maybe you think younger students might be living with their family, older students might be living solo. And you could get the answer to that by analyzing this pair of variables. You might also be wondering, maybe age is related to, on average, how many hours weekly do you spend commuting? Or maybe you think age is related to household income, but you need to look through the variables and know what's available, and then come up with some reasonable pairs that you think you could build an interesting and meaningful research question out of. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, real good. Other questions? Okay, so with that, let me do the breakout rooms. It takes me a minute to put the right people in the right places, so please be a little bit patient here.
Can I just confirm, are we picking the variables now, or are we just discussing?
Well, first, familiarize yourself with the variables, and then on your own, come up with some pairs that you think go together. And then maybe in your future meeting with your group, you could go around and talk about, I think this is the pair to go for, and these are my pairs, and here's my rationale. And maybe everyone will voice their ideas for pairs, and then ultimately your group will select 2 pairs. And that'll be where you're going to go for the remaining group assignments. Does that all make sense?
No.
Okay, yeah, I want this to make perfect sense of where you're going to go and what's going to happen. Okay, so let me make these assignments. Here we go. There's one.
I'm gonna get a chance to speak with you.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry. I'm gonna have a chance to talk with you about.
Yeah, we'll talk. We can talk right after class. Just, are you available?
Absolutely.
Okay, so just stick around when class ends. And okay, so that's group 1. And let me set in the members for group 2.
I don't know how to get out of this one.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms, and you'll have, I'm going to stop the recording, and 23 minutes, and then I'll close everything. And do what you can, be productive, enjoy your groups, get some good stuff done, and I'll see you all next time. But I'll cut the meeting in about 23 minutes. Okay.